It is draft season, and I'm here, Chris Allen, senior fantasy analyst here at 444, to talk about the quarterbacks that you should be targeting. Because if you've looked at any of the work that we've done here at 444 throughout the offseason, whether it's been Teacher Hernandez and his Best Ball Mania Bible, in terms of looking at the correlation between team stacking, like week 17, like once you get into the playoffs, anything like that. I mean, most of it pivots around like the quarterback, like who's going to be distributing whether the ball either via the air or through handoffs or however, in order to produce or create that fantasy production that we so need for our team. So I've got 6 quarterback targets that I've been looking at like throughout the offseason and will continue to look at once we get into the regular season. Because, I mean, the early round guys, of course, they're players that everybody is clamoring to get right now. And we'll get into those 2 guys later. We've got the middle round guys. So it might have, let's say, some uncertainty about them or some, let's say, some hype surrounding them. But I've got some justification, some stats, some charts in order for you to look at in order to justify, like, looking at them at their particular average draft position. Of course, the late round guys. If you caught any of my work over at 444, not only do I look at weather, of course, at Chris Allen FFWX, but I also do the quarterback streaming column as well. So it's going to be the late round guys, the guys that, yeah, you know, they might sound great in theory, but we're not entirely sure. Everybody's looking at more of the top 12 options. So I've got a couple of guys that will likely fit into that bin as well. So let's go ahead and dive right on into it. Hopefully it won't take up too much of your time tonight, but if anybody knows me well, they know I like to ramble quite a bit. So let's go ahead and hop on into it. All right, the early round guys. Let's see how quickly we can get through this. Jalen Hurts. Let's see. Right now, going on underdog, quarterback 6. Everybody's kind of feeling the hype. We've got the A.J. Brown trade for him, Devonta Smith coming into second season, Dallas Goedert. I mean, even the running backs. I mean, Miles Sanders, even though he said, like, don't draft him, probably should go ahead and draft him. And then Kenny Gainwell bringing up the rear. I mean, all the pieces that at least have some intrigue. But let's focus on Jalen Hurts himself and like how that offense like operated last season and why there is like so much hype surrounding him. Because if you look at like what Jalen Hurts was like last season and what that Eagles offense was, it was a primarily rushing offense last season. Looking at their pass rate over expectation throughout the 2021 season, Nick Sirianni comes in, tries to have Jalen Hurts focus on his passing skills. Wasn't really working out throughout the first like 5 to 6 weeks. And you can see there, once we got into the back half of the season, they started seeing like more and more rushing plays like there, like actually using the athleticism that Hurts had like coming out of college. And that's all fine and dandy. I mean, I have no problems with Jalen Hurts and being able to use like his legs in order to create the in order to create fantasy production. But the problem is, like, especially for fantasy production and even for his NFL career, he needs to also have like the passing portion as well. And hopefully we'll see that. I think there's reasons to be optimistic about it. But I think the key part is not only were they rushing more. I mean, these were more designed runs like for Jalen Hurts. It's not like he was, asked to drop back or have these 3, 5, 7-step concepts, and then he was just scrambling for his life, and he was able to create these types of the types of yardage that is, let's say, you can't replicate that type of production. No, I think it's possible, because if you look at his designed run rate, like throughout the course of the season, well, that continued to go up. That's continued to trend up. I mean, if you talk about like what Sirianni was actually trying to create for Hurts, it wasn't the fact that he was just a rusher. He was actually an efficient rusher as well. I mean, the design runs, Jalen Hurts' design run rate was actually second behind Kyler Murray throughout the entire NFL. I mean, he had more design runs than Lamar Jackson, like when he was healthy. I mean, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, Dak Prescott, like any of the rushing quarterbacks that you expect to see. I mean, Hurts was ahead of him, and he was efficient in doing it as well. I mean, number one in EPA, like per attempt, like as a rusher, like on those design runs. I mean, more so than Josh Allen. I mean, of course, we'll take rushing production, any sort of rushing production, but it is kind of, it's not to say convenient, but it is good to see that Jalen Hurts was capable of being efficient, like as a rusher. But of course, like I mentioned beforehand, the problem was like the passing portion. Like, can he actually be a good passer within the league? Well, I mean, over the back half of the season, like weeks 8 through 17, so that's an 8-game sample, he was 12th in completion percentage over expected. Now that's better than what most of us thought, especially, I mean, the last game, I mean, the final taste of our mouth regarding Jalen Hurts as a passer was when, I mean, the Bucks, I mean, completely, their defense completely picked that offense apart. But throughout the fantasy portion of the season, I mean, Hurts was actually viable as a passer, and we're hoping that we can continue to see more of a development from him in that area in the 2022 season. Because if you're looking at his passing chart, I mean, look at the deficiencies, like look at where he was actually, not really all that, well in terms of like his efficiency and also able to like connect with his targets. But think about the personality he had. Devonta Smith in his rookie season, Dallas Goedert, which is good, but not capable of impacting the game from an aerial standpoint, like the Travis Kelce's of the world, like the Mark Andrews of the world. I mean, shoot, even George Kittle, if you want to throw his name in there as well. So, I mean, Goddard, good, but not elite, or even Rob Gronkowski in his heyday. So we can see where Hurts was inefficient, like as a passer last season. Now, lo and behold, they go in and bring in AJ Brown, and looking at our own, or not our own, but my friend and like our friend for most of us in the fantasy community, Matt Harmon, looking at his information regarding AJ Brown and his success rate, the man can run a complete route tree. It's not just the intermediate and deep stuff that he was able to connect with Ryan Tannehill when he was still in Tennessee. He's able to run slants. He's able to run screens. He's able to be efficient in the short area of the field, which is where Hurts struggled. So now if you have Devonta Smith, who can also run an entire route tree, is successful at all three levels of the field, you bring in A.J. Brown as well. Now you give Hurts more options. You give Hurts more targets in the area of field where he was less efficient, and that gives him more time in order to become a better passer. Now, and again, Nick Sirianni, we saw him be flexible with that offense. We should expect him to continue to be flexible in 2022, but flexible in the sense that we give Hurts more better concepts or more layups like in that offense. So now Jalen Hurts, I mean, again, they're looking at their opening schedule. They start off against Detroit, Minnesota, Washington, and then Jacksonville. I mean, best ball redraft, I don't care which format you're talking about. That is a heck of an opening schedule, especially for a hybrid quarterback like Jalen Hurts. So you don't need me to tell you to draft Jalen Hurts, but I'm giving you the justification for that. But moving on, you don't need me to tell you to draft Lamar Jackson. But I'm going to tell you to do it anyway. I mean, last season, like while everybody was still healthy, I mean, think about all of the injuries that plagued the Baltimore Ravens like throughout the season. But like while Lamar Jackson was healthy, I mean, Baltimore 6th in EPA per play, 7th in total points per game. I mean, Lamar was still a top 12 option, both in efficiency and EPA per play and also in quarterback scoring, like while he was healthy. I mean, we saw all of these things. I mean, and still as a passer, Lamar Jackson, I mean, top 6, top 7 in completion percentage, like a completion percentage over expected. It wasn't until the back end of the season, I mean, where we saw just, I mean, injury after injury after injury. I mean, by week 16, the Ravens had 14 players like on injured reserve, with another 5 like ruled out that particular week. I mean, it was Lamar Jackson himself, Devin Duvernay like out. I mean, 2 starting offensive linemen. I mean, it was just a complete massacre like for the Ravens. And so now we're seeing so many other players coming back healthy. I mean, Gus Edwards, we'll see about week 1, but J.K. Dobbins looking like he's trending in the right direction. But really it comes back to the passing volume, or like who is going to be a part of this aerial attack for 2022. And it all starts with Rashad Bateman. I mean, Rashad Bateman last year, if you have a chance to go and check out one of the debates, that's a football debate that we do here at 4-4, take 2 players with similar ADPs. I happen to do one debating Rashad Bateman. I was pro Bateman against Brandon Cooks. And looking at like Bateman for just this little amount of time that he had like in 2021 in his rookie season, he played, I think it was just like 4, 5, 6 games like with Lamar Jackson, primarily outside, just 18.3% slot snaps like in his rookie season. But again, going back to reception perception, like what he was asked to do, and trying to contextualize what the Ravens asked him to do, like in his rookie season, like in the time that he was on the field with Lamar Jackson. I mean, look at like what he was capable of. I mean, 12th in air yards amongst all receivers in those games, especially, and also contextualizing or refining that list in order to look at players that were only playing on the outside. So comparing Rashad Bateman to other receivers in his area, top 20 in yak per reception, 23rd in yards per route run, so an efficient rusher. I mean, but the targets per route run, hopefully he can earn some more targets. But again, it just shows, it goes to show you like what in his rookie season, Rashad Bateman was capable of doing. And hopefully we're expecting to see more of him. The Baltimore Ravens surely are, since they shipped off Marquise Brown to Arizona. So we should have like really just like no other qualms against like trying to target Rashad Bateman. But again, going back to Lamar Jackson, we already know what he can do as a rusher. The passing acumen we know is still there. And like I just mentioned earlier, still top of his game in terms of completion percentage. It's just we need the targets or the players on the other end in order to catch like some of those targets. We know what Mark Andrews can do with the ball is in his hands. If Rashad Bateman can continue to ascend, like at least where guys like or folks like Matt Harmon are showing us what Bateman is capable of doing, I surely think, especially right now, given the discount of Lamar Jackson in drafts right now, he should definitely be a target. But again, you don't need me to tell you to draft Lamar Jackson, but you might need me to tell you to go ahead and draft like Derek Carr. Now, I was just on the Most Accurate podcast last night, talking with Jeff Feinberg and, of course, Jen Akins, the wonderful Jen Akins, about Derek Carr, because we're going through the AFC West. And it's just, if you were to ask anybody about Derek Carr, like, what do you think about Derek Carr? It's just kind of shrug his shoulders. And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, there's some allure here and there, but it's just over the past like few seasons. And really since he's become at least something of a fantasy target, it's difficult for us to like pin down, okay, well, I would rather have Kirk Cousins, which actually I think was the verbiage that Jeff Feinberg used last night. I would rather have Kirk Cousins because you think about the heights or the ceiling for Cousins has to be greater than Derek Carr. And I think you're right. I would think that, and I told Jeff that like last night, I think that he was right in saying that, because if you look at all the other metrics, he's cracked 100 yards rushing in the past like few seasons, which is good. He can still boogie once he gets out on the field, and that's fine. But for everything else that he's done so far, he's been, let's see, like if you look at the chart, like right here, fifth in yards, fifth in attempts. So he does have some play volume. Like top 20, like so in EPA per play, top 12 in completion percentage over expected. So it's all been good. It's all been solid. Like from a quarterback, like metric perspective, like he's always had like the toolsy type things, or the things that we would want to hear. But the real problem has always been just the touchdowns. That really has been like the issue with him. He hasn't cracked like 30 touchdowns since 2015 or 2016. And that's really been the issue for him. They've really had, once they get into like the red zone, he kind of breaks down. If you look at his touchdown rate, just this past season, look how far down he is, like on this list. we're talking about guys that, Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger. Of course, like Jalen Hurts, but we know Jalen Hurts can create touchdowns like with his legs. But just look at the other quarterbacks, like from a passing standpoint, that he's around in touchdown rate. And that's not just last season. That's been the case for the past 3 to 4 seasons. So I can understand the trepidation in trying to and wanting to draft a guy like Derek Carr. But if we look at who they just brought in, like for the head coach, we got Josh McDaniels coming in from New England. Let's look at what Mac Jones was like, his efficiency in the red zone throughout his rookie season. Now, if you think about the Patriots offense, like last season, so you got a rookie quarterback. And let's think about the pass catchers that were around him, like last year. Like Nelson Aguilar, but Jacoby Myers, who the running meme or running joke was that he couldn't catch a touchdown, at least didn't catch a touchdown from Mac Jones. Who else? Hunter Henry. Jonnu Smith. How many other playmakers were involved in that offense? And yet still, as you can see on this chart right here, the red zone EPA, so Mac Jones's efficiency in the red zone continues to trend up throughout the season. And this was the same team that had just 3 pass attempts in that cold weather game against Buffalo. This is the same team that when push came to shove, when they had to play against Tampa Bay, Bill Belichick pulled back the reins on Mac Jones. Any narrative that you wanted to throw at Mac Jones about the lack of passing skills or the fact that Bill Belichick didn't want to throw his rookie out there, but yet we still saw the red zone efficiency continue to creep up. So that can be a boon for Derek Carr this season. You throw in the coaching staff, but then you also throw in, Hunter Renfrow, who was 9th in EPA per target amongst wide receivers in the red zone. Darren Waller, 9th in EPA per target amongst all tight ends. Kenyon Drake, top 20 in EPA per target amongst all running backs. And then, some dude named Devontae Adams on top of that. So, all things being equal, mean, Derek Carr not only has the coaching staff, but the weaponry around him in order to, let's say, outkick his touchdown percentage like from years past. And if we already saw at least the highs that he was capable of achieving just last season, that was with, let's say, Hunter Renfrow, which is your prototypical slot receiver, and let's say half of Darren Waller. Now we get both of them with one of the best receivers like still in the game as of right now, and Devontae Adams on top of that. So I'm excited for Derek Carr. I do think that as of right now, QB 13 on Underdog. If you're looking at him for redraft, probably let's say in the 9th-ish round, like for redraft purposes as of right now. So if you can, I mean, pair him, if we're talking about best ball, pair him with the Tom Brady, pair him with the Russell Wilson, pair him with one of your top 6, like top 8 options, and you should have at least a dynamic quarterback duo that should be capable of producing on a weekly basis throughout the entire season. If you're looking for redraft options, if you're drafting him that late, you should have a solid core like built around him. So you don't necessarily need the highs of a top 6, top 8 quarterback, but you should be able to get that from Derek Carr, given the surrounding options around him. All right. So my second mid-round quarterback that you should be targeting. And I'm with Kirk Cousins here. I know, I mean, we're just talking about like Kirk Cousins with Derek Carr. I mean, if you had to compare the two, you would probably want Kirk Cousins given the highs. And I absolutely understand that. I'm with that 100%. But if you think about the Minnesota Vikings offense, like over the past, let's say, not even just last season, if you're going by the numbers for last season, looking at their pass rate over expectation, bottom half of the league. I mean, not the best in terms of like play volume, but Kirk Cousins was capable of being efficient, especially in spots. And if you were somebody that drafted a guy like Justin Jefferson, you were rewarded, especially considering, look at Justin Jefferson's campaign just last season. But if you want to go into the red zone, I mean, look at that. Bottom 5, bottom 6 in pass rate over expectation once you get into the red zone. So now Dalvin Cook managers are probably happy looking at like those results and probably remembering how it was like having him on your roster, like either him or Alexander Mattison, like pick one or the other. But I mean, this is a team that's been, I mean, 27th the season beforehand in 2020, 29th in early down passing rate in neutral situations. This is not a team that has really relied on passing volume, but more just efficiency, like from their quarterback in Kirk Cousins. So, but Mike Zimmer's gone. He's gone. Bring in Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay disciple. I mean, he was the Rams OC for 2 seasons. I mean, which of course anybody who has looked at teams that have taken on anybody a part of the Sean McVay team, they're expecting good things out of it or a boost in the offensive efficiency, whichever team that they wind up with. But here's another tidbit from Kevin O'Connell. He was the quarterback's coach in Washington back in 2017. I forget who the quarterback was in 2017. I don't know. It's probably not all that important. But the purpose, the big point is that we're not only seeing a boost in the amount of passing volume, should also see a boost in the amount of play volume as well. The Rams, I mean, again, looking at their neutral passing rate or actually the neutral pace, the Rams run more plays. I mean, we saw that last season, like all the way up through the Super Bowl. I mean, they were top 4, top 5 in pace of play just last season. Look where Minnesota's at. I mean, below average. So not only should we expect to see at least an increase in the number of pass attempts, we should see the total number of just play attempts in general up for the Minnesota Vikings. So all of this, I mean, slight boosts or slight changes along the offensive line. Hope to see more from Dalvin Cook this season. But now we're also talking about, I mean, Justin Jefferson being more like moved into the quote unquote Cooper Kupp role like this year as well. So new highs for Justin Jefferson, who's already in the top 2, top 3 options at wide receiver for this season, along with increased play volume for the Minnesota Vikings offense. Like, Kirk Cousins should definitely be one of your targets like for this season. It's definitely been one of mine. So like I would say highly advocate like for trying to target any piece of the Vikings offense at this point. Shoot, if you want to even go past like the 2 primary like pieces of that offense in Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. I mean, Alexander Mattison, probably one of the key backups that folks are targeting. Irv Smith, healthy now. KJ Osborne coming out of the woodwork as well as a possible wide receiver 3. I mean, all of those pieces, I mean, should be something that we should be targeting. And I am, and hopefully you will as well. All right, couple more. The late round guys. Let's go ahead and hop into them. All right. First one, first late round guy. And of course, I'm pretty sure everybody's been talking about him like since he made the move from Atlanta. It's Matt Ryan. I mean, the easiest way to think about like Matt Ryan, like for the 2022 season, is he doesn't have to deal with what was going on in Atlanta. I mean, if you look at, and this is from our own Sam Hoppin, I mean, director of analytics, but this is from a piece that our own Justin Edwards, our offensive line guru, wrote, looking at what Matt Ryan had to deal with last season. And for those folks looking at the chart and don't know how to take a look at it, blown block percentage for passing on the x-axis, running block, blown block percentage on the vertical axis. And if you're in the top right quadrant, that's not good. Look at all the teams that are up there as of right now. You can probably make a solid guess. I mean, just looking at the teams that are up here as to which quadrant you don't want to be in. Because if you're in the same quadrant as the Giants, the Seahawks, and the Jets, probably don't want to be in that quadrant. The Bills, that's kind of surprisingly up there, but we'll talk about that later. But as of right now, Atlanta, one of the worst offenses like last season of the offensive lines. And now you're moving to an offensive line that actually is number 10 or number 11, according to our own Justin Edwards, with a number of changes, at least not changes rather, but just the health. I mean, how many of their offensive linemen like were injured or had to miss time like last season? But despite, and on top of that, having Carson Wentz under center, but move past all that. Now you've got Matt Ryan. And before we even get into like the primary weaponry that he's going to be passing to that makes drafting Matt Ryan like such a positive thing here in 2022. I mean, we'll even look at the ancillary players. I mean, I'm going to talk about JT. I'm not going to talk about Michael Pittman yet. Let's look at the ancillary players as of right now. Nyheim Hines. I mean, we've heard press conference after press conference, like from whether it's from Chris Ballard himself or Frank Reich, like talking about like, well, if I was playing fantasy, I would draft Nyheim Hines, and you absolutely should. I mean, if you want to talk about like fantasy production, like from the running back position, we're talking about like running backs that actually get targets, but it's not just any type of target. I mean, there's a difference between, let's say, a Saquon Barkley dump off and a pass to, let's say, Aaron Jones or Alvin Kamara, because those guys are actually running routes. Nyheim Hines actually runs routes. Just looking at his average depth of target and his yards per route run, or the efficiency he was capable of running like off of those targets. I mean, Nyheim Hines was up there with those guys, the Aaron Joneses, the Alvin Kamara, at least not Alvin Kamara last year, but 2019, 2020 Alvin Kamara. So if we're talking about a running back capable of running routes and also being efficient like with those routes, and now Matt Ryan, a guy that has made a number of running backs are fantasy relevant like through the air, like over like in his tenure, like in Atlanta. Okay. And now on top of that, like you also get, now we can hop into like the main pieces of it. Again, going back to reception perception, shout out to Matt Harmon. We've got, again, one of the primary like wide receivers like in there. I mean, he'd already called him as a breakout going into 2021. And now here in 2022, 96 percentile success rate against press coverage last season. I mean, there are only so few wide receivers in the game that are capable of putting up those types of numbers. So you get Michael Pittman on top of that. And then, of course, you've got the running back one, at least for some folks. I'm personally targeting Christian McCaffrey, but I will hear the argument for Jonathan Taylor at the 101 all day long. I mean, he accrued the most first downs for any running back, so that helps Matt Ryan in being able to keep the chains moving. And then, of course, if you want to talk about being able to generate explosives, most 10-yard runs, most 15 or more yard runs. And of course, you want Jonathan Taylor, at least from a tactical perspective, again, because this all ties back to Matt Ryan's fantasy value. But if you want the more shots on goal, more attempts like in the red zone, like for a guy like Matt Ryan, because we know he's not going to be able to produce like on like using his legs, at least not for the most part, not where he's at least at this point in his career. He could probably still get down with some of the best of them, but if the most of the primary portion of his fantasy production is going to come through the air, you do want a guy like JT in order to grind out some of those first downs, and that's what you get in this offense. So Matt Ryan right now going as quarterback 20 on underdog. I mean, late round option for sure, but looking at his opening schedule too, week 1 against Houston, week 2 against Jacksonville. I mean, come on. From a streaming perspective, redraft perspective, you could not ask for a better setup to start off like your season. So if you wanted to wait all the way until the 11th or 12th round in redraft leagues, and you've got basically your entire starting lineup set, then after that, drop in Matt Ryan on top of that, who should at least have top 12 upside for the first couple of weeks, and you can figure out what's going to happen thereafter. All right, one last one for you. All right, so I'll go back to that chart that I was showing beforehand. Showed you that offensive line chart, and we looked at, the Atlanta Falcons, get all the way up in that top right-hand corner over there. Let's look at the team that's just like right next to Atlanta afterwards, and that's the New York Giants. Think about what Daniel Jones had to deal with just last season. Not only was the offensive line at its worst like last year, you're also talking about injuries to not just Saquon Barkley, injuries to Kenny Golladay that they made such a big deal about acquiring him in free agency. Shoot, even Daniel Jones went through some injury pains like himself just last year. So what happens? They bring in Brian Daboll. Which is great, like from an offensive standpoint. We know that schematically, he should at least be able to help this offense and bring in some of the concepts that should at least make this offense a bit more efficient. But the big thing, and the reason why I brought up that chart just a second ago, is actually also brought in Bobby Johnson. He was the Bills offensive line coach for the past 2 seasons. So let's see, they spend a first and a third on offensive linemen. They bring in free agent acquisitions, a lineman from Indianapolis, lineman from at least one lineman from the Bills, another lineman from the Cardinals. So they bring in a number of, let's say, mid-tier talent, see what sticks, and hopefully they can come up with at least a unit that's better than what they had last year. A bottom 4, bottom 5 offensive unit, not just in pass blocking, but in run blocking as well. So if the offensive line is good, let's turn to the pass catchers. We're already hearing good things about Kadarius Toney being able to be not just one of the most efficient wide receivers who's out there on the field, but also flexible wide receivers, capable of playing Zeke, capable of playing in the slot. Galladay's back up and running. Wan'Dale Robinson, the prospect that they drafted this season, capable of playing in the slot as well, hyper efficient from that area. And of course, Saquon Barkley, another debate that I wrote. Debating Saquon Barkley versus James Conner. Now, my argument for Saquon Barkley is that his route running ability primarily been just a dump off type of guy. Think back to that Nyheim Hines chart that I pulled up earlier, those inefficient targets that, of course, we'll take them as fantasy gamers, but I want the ones that are going downfield, or at least a few yards down the field, if at all possible. Already seeing training camp videos coming out of Saquon Barkley running downfield routes. Short intermediate routes. I'm not talking about, 10 yards downfield, but at least enough in order for him to actually create more after the catch. Use his size, speed, and power as a rusher, but now out in the open field. So if you get some of that, Saquon Barkley was top 20 in yards per route run just last season when he was healthy in those 5 to 6 games. And he's been top 10 in yards per route run since he was drafted back in 2018. If you pull all of those things together, Daniel Jones at least has the core, the nucleus of that offense that should be efficient and capable of providing him with those types of games where he's not always going to be a top 12 option, but at least we're flirting with those types of numbers, especially given right now, quarterback 21 on underdog. If we get more of those layups, we get more of those short and intermediate passes. Let's look at Josh Allen's short intermediate pass attempts over this first 3 to 4 seasons. Again, as the number of short and intermediate pass attempts went up, you can see his completion percentage over expected also start to pick up. Brian Daboll was key in that development of just giving him high percentage routes, high percentage targets that can give him just easy layups in order to move the ball down the field. And looking at, the big jump for Josh Allen was when they brought in Stephon Diggs in 2020. Now look at the personnel weaponry around Daniel Jones. Just list them off. From, of course, starting at the top of Kadarius Toney, but if you also bring in other players, Kenny Golladay being healthy, Wan'Dale Robinson, Saquon Barkley being healthy. All of these options for him, at least it bodes well for his level of efficiency and what he's capable of providing to fantasy drafters in 2022. So there you have it, folks. I've kind of walked through each phase of the draft. You've got the early round guys, of course, that everybody, like I said before, everybody wants a piece of Jalen Hurts. Everybody wants a piece of Lamar Jackson. And I completely understand that. I mean, some folks at least are interested in Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr. But if you're the one that wants to try and wait, if you're the type of fantasy manager that wants to try and get the most out of the core positions and build their roster and then drop in like one of these quarterbacks like at the very end, of course you've got options like Matt Ryan. Of course, like I said, has a great opening schedule for the first couple of weeks. I mean, Daniel Jones, who at least has spike week potential, like with his design runs, his design run rate, which was like 31% in 2019, up to 56, 57% just last season. So we know the spike weeks are there for him. So with all of that, I mean, depending on your flavor, like how flavor of like team roster building or fantasy drafting, I mean, you can find those types of options like as you enter your drafts, like for this season. So appreciate y'all checking out the video. Like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things that you can continue to support, not just me, but of course the entire crew here at 444. I appreciate y'all for checking it out. Good luck in your 2022 drafts, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.